we'll do, all right, good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all this morning virtually. We have just some extraordinary individuals who are going to be sharing about their experiences over the last year and kind of looking forward in terms of volunteer engagement. So I know we just have a couple of individuals right now on, so we may as well go ahead and do some quick introductions. So I see Kathleen.
Hi there, I'm Kathleen.
Hi.
I'm the CEO of a company called Bridge Area ARC. We're a nonprofit who cares for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Wonderful.
In a bunch of different ways.
Okay.
So excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. We were just talking about inclusion. And so I may have some questions for you, maybe offline that we can chat some about. Wonderful. So was there anyone else? I see Brian joined and Fran. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Hi, Christine. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, there you are. Good to see you all. Okay, great. So I know most of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with Volunteer Florida, but I did just quickly want to remind everybody about what we do. And then we will go right into our speakers. I want to give them as much time as possible. And we're also going to look at a couple of trends from Points of Light. It's a survey that they did. It's been about a year, so we know a lot of things have changed, but hopefully some of the information is beneficial for you all. And I can send you the report afterward because it's available online to them. So just real quickly, Volunteer Florida, we're the state's lead agency for volunteerism and national service. I mean, many people don't realize that every state has a state service commission. So in order to receive certain streams of dollars, federal dollars from AmeriCorps, and for AmeriCorps, a state service commission had to be established. So all of us, we've been around for about 25 years. And then our state service commission is also the lead agency for volunteers and donations before, during, and after disasters. So that's a significant role that we have. So national service, emergency management, and then fostering volunteerism, which is really where I come in as the volunteer services director. And I suppose I should say my name is Jovita Woodrich. So that's the area that I focus on. It's training, and then our really fantastic volunteer opportunities platform called Volunteer Connect. I know many of you have registered. Very easy way for you to post opportunities, and then you can just leave it. You don't have to do a whole lot of management. It's a posting and recruiting opportunity for you all. And so Volunteer Florida wants to see Floridians engaged, communities transformed, and we ultimately want Florida to be a better place to live. So of course we are aligned with all of you in that way, and we're so thankful for the work that you all do in your communities to make that happen. So we have a number of different ways that we can support you. We have, of course, our funding opportunities. All three of our speakers are with organizations that have either received AmeriCorps funding or our Volunteer Generation Fund funding, and I know that those have been beneficial to their organizations. Resources, training, if you all ever have questions, want to troubleshoot volunteer engagement, please give me a call or email me. I'll have my email later on. And then we do trainings like this, and they're always available online. And then, of course, Volunteer Connect, which I just mentioned. So if you are not on our newsletter list, I would encourage you to do that. That's a great opportunity to find out what's going on with our organization. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start introduction. So our first up for us is Barbara. Are you Caesar or Cesar?
Cesar, thank you for asking.
You're welcome. And Barbara is with Centro Campesino, and they are in kind of the southern area of Miami-Dade County. And she is the director of education there, which includes volunteer management. So I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself. Go ahead, Barbara.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me representing Centro Campesino. And I have the opportunity to serve as the oversight for our youth programming, our disaster relief, and our AmeriCorps program.
Wonderful. And how long have you been with the organization?
In July, I will be there for 4 years.
All right, wonderful. Okay, great. So just a couple of quick pictures of her organization and some of the work that they've done there. All right, and so next we're going to go to Nicole. And Nicole Smith is the Volunteer and Internship Services Manager at the Adrian Arsht Center for the Performing Arts in Miami-Dade County. So go ahead and share a little bit with us about yourself, Nicole.
Hi, good morning. I am thrilled to be here. I manage the volunteers and interns at the Arsht Center. I've been in the position since 2014, and in July, I'll be with the center for 9 years. And so I do just everything volunteer, from recruiting, training, engaging, recognizing, anything that you can possibly think of. That is what I do. And I sent these pictures. I didn't realize how busy it was until you guys put them on the screen. Sorry. Yeah, that's.
Oh, but it's great. I think it captures the essence of what you all do, which is really extraordinary. So thank you, Nicole. And then last but most certainly not least, we have Nathan, and he is with Metropolitan Ministries. He's the Director of Volunteer Services there, and that's in Hillsborough County. They reach out into Pasco as well. So if you want to introduce yourself, Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Nathan Gula. I am, as you mentioned, the Director of Volunteer Services. We have about 28,000 volunteers spanning over 3 county areas. So we really cover the whole Tampa Bay area. And I've been at the organization, just over 7 years now. So It's been a good journey.
Look at us, not burned out, sticking with it. I know we all understand that, but just thank you all so much for being here. I'm looking forward to some of the conversation that we're going to have today. And if any of you who are participating have any questions, please put those in the chat. We have the incomparable Lizzie Winchester here, who's our grants and training coordinator. She'll be monitoring the chat and helping out if anybody needs some troubleshooting. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. I'd love to hear, Barbara, you can go ahead and start with what your volunteer program looked like prior to COVID, and then as the pandemic kind of began to swell, what some of those shifts started to be. So especially focusing on what you did prior to COVID.
Great. So at Centro Campesino, we actually have several volunteer engagement opportunities. Our main focus has always been our youth program. That's the one that's always high in demand, and individuals have interest in volunteering. So prior to that, we had a very open policy as far as being able to onboard any volunteer that's of interest. We do a local background check, of course, because we're working with what is considered a vulnerable population, the youth. And it's a process that our team are equipped to walk the volunteers through, so that way they have one-on-one experience, because sometimes it could be challenging. Some people are volunteering for the first time, or they're doing it for school, so they don't have much experience when it comes to the HR processes per se. So basically, we had the opportunity and the leverage to be able to assess the individual's interest. So if maybe there was a placement for volunteer service that would be of better interest for the volunteer, the prospective volunteers, we would assess that and do a placement, like with our disaster program, for instance, our emergency assistance programming, or workforce development. And we had also the flexibilities for our volunteers to kind of create their own schedule within operating times. So we were very accommodating to the needs of our volunteers. That, of course, quickly shifted as March 2020 came about, and we had to completely revamp our volunteer process. We were not able to bring on-site volunteers anymore for the time being, and mainly because of the CDC guidelines, because of social distancing and the safety protocols and policies that were in place at the time. So that's just a little bit of a glimpse as to what we were before and the immediate drastic change for our program.
Thank you, Barbara. And we'll go to Nathan next. Would love to hear kind of what, with those 28,000 volunteers you were doing prior to COVID, and then just kind of that initial kind of shift, or that you thought you were going to need to make when the pandemic hit in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, as you can imagine, with the volume of volunteers that we have, we really segment out our programs from anything from our corporate groups to our faith groups to our family groups to individuals who drop in, our volunteer leadership. Each of those different segments has a different strategy for us. And so we really very intentional about how we grow that, how we engage and build those relationships. For us, it's split between our volunteer groups, kind of drop-in volunteers who can sign up right online, and then volunteer leaders who go through a more extensive background check and training and kind of guidelines prior to onboarding. And that's concentrated mostly on our campuses. For us, it's very, very seasonal. So, during non-peak times, maybe 150, 200 people a day. During peak times, we could see over 1,000 volunteers in a single day to make everything run. So they would do everything from helping prep our kitchen meals, to sorting donations, cleaning our campus, working with our children, all the way up to my volunteer leaders who, I have a lady whose background for 40 years in IT. She was like one of the original pioneers working in giant computer size, rooms. Room size computers. And she works and does app design for us now for internal systems.
Wow.
So you name it, our goal is really we could use anybody. So
Nathan, I don't think I've heard about that. You said drop-in volunteers where people register online. Can you just tell me a little bit about that real quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have kind of more high need volunteers high skilled volunteers that are in kind of specific areas where we're not going to have someone come in who has no training. But for a lot of our opportunities, serving in our kitchen, serving with our in our clothing warehouse, our outreach department, they're able to come in and sign up online for any shift. We have shifts from 6 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. every single day of the week. So people sign up online, they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. We leave it really vague. They show up and we're like, hey, all right, here's what we need help with today. And we'll give them a training and get them oriented and get going. So really trying to be very flexible in that kind of way.
That's huge. We'll talk a little bit later, but one of the barriers to volunteering, the lack of time, or maybe you don't know what your schedule is going to be. So the idea of being able to do that last minute, so to speak, is significant. I don't think I've heard of too many organizations that do that. So I really like that. And I may talk to you a little bit more about kind of how that works. Really
for us, a lot of it's intentionality on the front end. It's onboarding for all staff, not just the volunteer services team, to have the expectation that in their role, they're going to be using volunteers.
Okay, so that's also huge. Other staff members recognizing the importance of volunteers and then knowing that they will be managing in a lot of ways those same volunteers, that it's not just on you to do that. That's huge. See, I told you all they have all the best practices in the world and you all should be best friends with. So thank you for that. Those are two just really smart ways that you all are managing, caring for your volunteers to achieve your mission. All right, so Nicole, what?
Before you move on, I'm sorry, can I ask Nathan a real quick question? Are these individuals already background checked and then they just pop in whenever they need or whenever they have time to kind of fit into a slot? So they're already vetted, in other words.
Yeah, so on our end, we don't background check every volunteer. It depends on their area of placement. So for those drop-in volunteers, there's only certain departments that will use them. And for that reason, we use a system called Raptor, which a lot of schools use. So for adults that are coming in, we just scan their ID really quick and it does a localized check.
Oh, wow. Raptor. Yeah, a lot of school systems use that. If you're familiar with that.
All their training and stuff is designed around schools. With our volume, it really is appropriate.
Got it. I'll write that down. Okay, great. So Nicole at Arsh Center, so we're going to shift to the arts and culture. What did your volunteer program look like prior to COVID?
So prior to COVID, we had about 350 to 400 volunteers, and they engaged in all things from ushering to admin, audio description, tour guides, just all sorts of different things. And then for us, it was a little bit different. I know everybody experienced the shutdown, that was it. But with us being a performing arts center, like we were shut down, like closed, like done, that's it. I wasn't even sure if I was going to have a job. So that was like the first like pivot is, okay, the theater is done. Because a lot of people in my industry, the volunteer manager was either furloughed or laid off. So I wasn't even sure if I was going to have a job because by the nature of the performing arts, you know, people are literally sitting next to each other. So and the way they make money is to sell full houses. So if you can't sell a full house, you're either all the way open or you're all the way closed. There's kind of like no in between. So when I did get the news, thank the Lord, that they were going to keep me on, then it was, okay, my job was to keep the volunteers as engaged as possible so that whenever we did open back up, we weren't starting from scratch because we've lost everybody and haven't talked to them for 3 or 4 months, which we thought it was going to be. And then like, hey, come back. So I went into extensive engagement type things, which we can go into a little bit later, but that was the biggest change. It was like, okay, we're closed. Okay, I still have my job. Okay, how do I let the organization know that I'm still worthy to keep my job by making sure that I'm engaging them? So there was a lot of stuff going on. It was very intense, but that's the short of it.
Short version. And right, I mean, the personal and professional components of the pandemic were extremely overwhelming. You have your family to take care of, and then also you're taking care of volunteers and want the mission of your organization to continue to be achieved. So I know there were a tremendous number of layers when it comes to that March 2020 moment that we all experience. Whoever sighed, that's the truth. I think we're all just starting to recover. So, you know, with Nathan and Barbara, you all, you know, are, you know, especially with Nathan, but both of you, you're delivering essential services. So the option to stop was not really there, you know, in terms of your clients, the people that you all served. So, you know, you knew you weren't going to shut down completely, I'm assuming. You know, were you all at the table when it came to some of the bigger decisions the organization was making about what to do moving forward? You know, and I know things shifted a lot, but some of those initial talks, how much were you kind of consulted about what needed to happen next?
Want me to go first? All right. So I'll say on our end, yeah, we were obviously very, very involved with decision-making and at the table there. As you mentioned, we have essential services, like it did not stop, our needs actually increased. We served this year 43% more meals, about 2.7 million meals that went out. Our rent increase assistance went up about 1,000%, a little over 1,000%. So, you know, volunteers are really vital to what we do on a day-to-day basis. Something really interesting that we did during kind of the peak of the pandemic, where we did shut down taking in regular volunteers for about 2 months, we pivoted our volunteer services team to actually kind of run our staff engagement. And so we were pulling our staff into all of those kind of essential roles that volunteers typically fulfilled. So it was either my team directly doing those or organizing the internal staff that were volunteering to fill in those essential services to make sure we can go on as we, in the early days, we're really trying to figure out and get a handle on this pandemic.
Like Nathan, most definitely, our services also increased drastically. I do sit on the leaders committee at our agency. So I was frontline decision maker along with our executive director as to what steps to take. Of course, blindly, the beginning of March 2020, I'll share a little later why that's such a crucial month for me. But we were beginning to somewhat understand or grasp the actual worldwide situation and how it could potentially, in quotations, affect us. We realized that indeed it will affect us, and how quickly could we shift our services, because we knew at the time that we could not shut down, and we knew what our community needs are and were at the time. And we knew that they were just going to be heightened during that time period. So we were able to, within, I would say, a span of a week and a half or so, reassign laptops, do the remote work, get the gears and equipment needed for our teams to be able to fully function from home. And these are all functionalities that in some worlds are the norm, right? There's many remote working positions available in the United States, right? And even abroad. But for us, it was a completely new concept because what we knew is always direct services. But fortunately, our funders were crucial and key players to assisting us with the process, not only just support in general, but funding as well, to be able to have the funds available to equip our teams to be able to transition to the remote world, operating in a hybrid approach, of course.
Thank you. Okay, so were you getting calls from volunteers at that point? Were people concerned about the mission? Were they wondering whether they could volunteer? Were you getting pushback? People who, what was the vibe, so to speak, from volunteers, or was it kind of radio silence at that point? Prior to even trying to figure out what kind of engagement strategy to employ moving forward, did you have a pulse from them? Were you reaching out to them in that initial stage, and what did it look like?
For us in the beginning, it was just dormant. There was no engagement, there was no recalls, there were no requests. And by all means, I am very transparent. We probably didn't even have the capacity to be able to address it as we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with our agency and with our current load of participants. But no, there weren't any calls. There weren't anybody reaching out to us at the beginning. I should specify.
Yeah, for us, the calls of when we knew it was serious, it was like, we got a call, like, oh, this group canceled, like, oh, 7 more groups canceled, oh, 20 groups just canceled today. So like, it was a very clear and fast escalation of people more so canceling and saying, I'm so sorry, I can't come out. But what we did get, and what we were able to pivot a lot of our volunteers into, was just engaging us through in-kind and through donations. We saw a huge surge in the amount of our donors, in terms of volunteers who were donating their time, switch to become donors who were giving financially. So that was something we kind of leaned on, that relationship that way, because they felt, they wanted to be there, they wanted to be involved in their mission, they're so invested in it, but they couldn't physically be there. So
yeah, that's great. Nicole?
Yeah, with us, with our volunteers, with us closing, part of it was kind of like a 50-50, because some of them also didn't want it. They didn't want to come. They were like, we don't know what's going on. We need to make sure that we're safe, because a lot of them were in the high risk age group anyway. And they were like, we don't even want to be around.
Sure.
So, but what we ended up doing to keep them engaged, because what we were hearing is, we miss everybody, because as we all know, volunteering isn't always just about what they're doing to give back. It's that community, it's that that sense of belonging and the friendships that they've gained. And it was like, we miss everybody. So we did a hard pivot really quick. I became like a Zoom master, like overnight. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, I just hit this button and I sent a link and I was like, is anybody there? So we just started doing, we would have like a briefing before every show where volunteers would receive their assignments, if this is what you're going to do for the evening, whatever. So what we started doing was virtual briefings, and we called it, so we would hold them at the same time that we normally would if there was a show that was going on, and we would give information, and we turned them into engagement. So it turned into trivia, it turned into just random things just to keep them engaged, because they were used to seeing each other every weekend, and then now it was completely taken away, and they can't go to each other's houses, they can't do, but we were able to safely meet over Zoom, and that actually worked out really well. And then the other thing that I did was, in terms of just the same thing that Nathan was talking about, I connected the it was really great, because I was able to connect the volunteers to other departments in the theater who never had time for it. So it was, would you like to come and talk to the volunteers to tell them a little bit more about what you do, PR, a little bit about what you do, operations, a little bit about what you do, finance, a little bit about what you to development.
Mhm.
And we had the opportunity to infuse them with, this is all the stuff that you missed. This is what's going on in the center. This is the part of the big picture that you hold such a important part of. And then with that, we were able to ask for volunteers to help. We went through our whole list of, okay, who did you used to, like, development was like all over it. They're like, who did you used to work with? Who do you know at any of your organizations that you retired from? Let's make connections, because this is a perfect time to reach out to people in order to donate for whatever is going on. So they were all about that. Development came in, they educated them about all the different ways that people could give back. So it's not only educating them, but it's like, hey, if you want to give, you can, but hey, tell your friends and your family, if there's ever a time that we needed the arts, it's now. And it was a beautiful, like, threefold. It kept them engaged. It connected the staff with the volunteers in ways that would have never happened before. And then it also empowered them to still use the connections that they had to possibly bring in funds. So it was weird, but it was a beautiful byproduct of what happened.
And you all have mentioned things that people kind of, there's this pre, during, and post pandemic kind of way that we look at things, but you all are talking about things that can continue. Either you have continued them or you now have them in your toolkit, versus things being only appropriate for the pandemic. And I've talked to people who have said, here's something that we did, we're trying to shift to something else, and I've had to pause and say, but that was working really well. Is it something that you can continue? Virtual connection is not going away, and it was here prior to the pandemic. I have board meetings that were online prior to this, because rushing from my job at 5 o'clock to a 5:30 board meeting, we have much better participation because we're virtual, or the option is there. So something like engaging volunteers so that their ego invested in the whole organization, that is invaluable and can continue for you all. Or having staff have a better idea of what the volunteers are doing because they themselves had to do it, Nathan. You say, okay, you watch this person. We were just at Metropolitan Ministries. I know I missed you last week, and I'm watching people. You said people do cleaning there. If you have your staff members go and do that for an hour, they're going to appreciate the work that your volunteers do more so than, I cannot clean a toilet. I just want everyone to know it is not one of my spiritual gifts. But, when you have those kinds of things that were occurring, then you're getting that level of investment that you maybe didn't even have before. So I guess that's a praise and also encouragement to everyone who's participating in the session, that if something worked, it doesn't mean because people are now out and about and able to be together that it needs to go away. It is now another component of the way that you're managing your volunteer program. So that information you all just shared is really invaluable. So in terms of, let's go kind of fast forward to later on in the pandemic, things are just slogging on. When you get to maybe later last year or early this year, kind of, what was going on at that point in terms of, engagement. This would be a great time, Nicole, for you to kind of talk about continued engagement, what you all did, your drive-through appreciation, all of that. But this staying connected to them throughout, what some of those things looked like, and then what you were hearing as people started to have more of an interest in coming back. So we'll start first with that. Last year, late last year into this year, who was hanging on, and how were you staying connected to them? So Nicole, I'd love to hear kind of more extensively about engagement during that time for you.
Absolutely. So as we rolled around to September, October, and we realized this is the new normal for a while, we had to really put our thinking caps into gear and figure out what we can do. So a couple of things that I did was because I was getting tired. Because March, it was like, oh my gosh. And then April was like, oh, this is cool. And then May and June, it was like, I can't do this anymore. So what I started doing was connecting with the community. And the community had a lot of information that they wanted to share. So I connected with AARP, and they came in for 3 weeks and did informational sessions with our volunteers that were important to them. And some of our volunteers, which I also found out, because of what they do in their everyday, they were also sharing. So we had somebody who works for an insurance company who they saw a rise in insurance claims go up because everybody was now working at home and now they were having back problems and things like that. She did a session for us on how to ergonomically set up your home station, right?
That's great.
Did it. We had a volunteer who was an estate lawyer, and she was like, now's the time to get your papers in order. The AARP came in and talked about fraud and health and like all of these things. It was beautiful because all I had to do was make the connection, and for 3 weeks I didn't have to come up with content. And then what was beautiful after that is they knew, so they were like, oh, we love this so much, have you heard of so and so? And they connected us with that. That was another month of content that I didn't have to come up with, but we were still connecting and it was still engaging the volunteers. So that happened for almost about 3 months after all of that, reaching out to community partners. Secondly, what we did, we took this time to train our volunteers. And my whole thing was like, when the center opens back up, this is the stuff that we need to be aware of. So we went into diversity training. We went into inclusion training. We reached out to Lighthouse for the Blind. They did a whole session on this is how you work with guests who are blind. We reached out to the Center for Independent Living. And this is how you work with guests who are deaf. This is how you work with guests with service animals. This is how you work with guests with autism. We went down this, like the whole spectrum of it all. And then from that, what happened, what springboarded off of that, after we did the session of how to work with deaf guests, we had volunteers who were either learning sign language or teaching, or like they were in the process of learning. But then we just put out a call for, hey, do you want to volunteer by teaching ASL to our volunteers? So that springboarded into, now we have weekly classes that are still going on, talking about the continued engagement of volunteers who once a week they're getting together and they're learning basic theater, American Sign Language. Like, they're not going to be fluent. It's not like a class. If you want to go learn sign language, you should go take a class. But this is stuff that when the theater opens back up and somebody's like, hey, where's the bathroom? They can tell you where the bathroom is. We did the same thing for Spanish. We have people who speak Spanish, Creole, and I forget all the other, French. So we just started classes where they're just meeting basically week after week. Just, hey, this is how you say ticket. This is how you say box office. The stuff that is really going to be able to translate to no pun intended, with our guests to get them where they needed. And then one of the things that we did, because as we all know, for our annual appreciation, which we usually do at the end of our season, which was the end of September, we clearly weren't going to be able to do a volunteer dinner, anything like that. So we did a drive-through appreciation event where we told all the volunteers to come, between such and such a time and such a time. I was able to recruit like 13 different departments, from the CEO all the way. So we had the CEO, VPs, everybody, and the volunteers were driving by, and just even thinking about it, they're driving by and it was just, we miss you. We can't wait to come back. So, they drive down, we give them a little bag. Volunteers were crying. They were like, thank you for this. Because they missed the connection. So even if they weren't hugging or whatever, just the drive-by and to see the faces, and for the CEO to be out there saying, we miss you. We can't wait for you to come back. I mean, nobody expected tears. I was like, okay, and at such and such a time, and such a time, and get this, and did they get their bag? And next person go. They were crying. They were crying tears. Like, I was just like, that was a byproduct, wasn't expecting it, but it was just a way that we were all able to come together and figure out a way to create that connection, even with the center still being closed. And it really helped, because when we started slowly opening back up, we had a core people that, even though, because we're not opening back up full. We were opening back up slowly, and we had just enough to handle. So as we're slowly opening up, they're coming back little by little, and we've been able to handle the opening back up as we've gone along.
That is huge. And again, these are things you can continue to do. And Nicole she does consulting, she does speaking, she is an all-star, as are all of you. So of course, every one of you, incredible. But with Nicole, that connection component, even prior to COVID, I'm gonna just put you out there, that if you ever want to talk about that, her volunteers are tight. They are really close to one another and to her. Yeah. And of course, she's in a performing arts center. There are different components than Florida Parks or an ARC or, a United Way and so on, in terms of how that manifests itself. But, whether it's somebody coming in and doing food prep, you can facilitate an environment for that individual so that they want to come back and they feel connected to other volunteers and or staff members. We know that there are times, and in organizations, none of yours, where volunteers feel a bit second rate to staff, or they have staff members that they ask questions to and the staff doesn't know and off they go. But like Nathan talked about, when your staff values and sees the importance of volunteers, when they are hanging out, when they pop into a training session, when they volunteer, where they work with the volunteer doing that work, those are the kinds of things that make volunteers want to come back and tell their friends, this is a place where I feel connected. Now, we know there are plenty of volunteers who come in, do their thing, and out they go. They're not interested in that, but facilitating that is something that you can, slingshot back around from COVID and continue that, but is something that is part of why people come back, is that sense of ownership of the organization. And then with what Nicole said, that's huge, with continuing education and professional development for volunteers. And it could be that you curate a list of resources for them. And in a newsletter, you say, listen, here's some really great reports on XYZ. Here's some information about, whatever the interest might be for the volunteers, like with the AARP or the ergonomics. I mean, those are brilliant ideas. You don't have to necessarily host it, but you could certainly at the bottom of your newsletter say, and you want to know more about this, or, those kinds of things where people know that you kind of care about them collectively, their lives, not just the volunteer work that they do. So Nathan, I would love to hear about the what you all did, the tent. Was that at Christmas time? I'd love to hear about kind of how that went for you all.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know Metropolitan Ministries, we are known for our large holiday tent we put up. Calling it a tent is beyond misleading. It is the size of a super Walmart. It is a tent. And so we assist families with Thanksgiving meals, and then in Christmas season, we'll do food as well as toys. We see about 40,000 families from the Tampa Bay area come through. Now this year it was very, very different. We were able to kind of more decentralize our services. So instead we broke out into smaller tents. They still have the tents because we want to keep that tent tradition, but dispersed all throughout the Tampa Bay area. And I honestly, this was something that I loved because we got to engage volunteers. I have all my volunteer data. I know that in 33610, I have, 708 volunteers that live in that zip code. We break it down to that level. And so
that's great.
I'm able to tell them, hey, there's this pop-up site. Families in your community are registering it. It's 2 miles down the street from your house. Can you go out to this community site and help serve? And we did a drive-through distribution model this year for all those holiday services. So we really got to localize things this year, and I absolutely love that. And I think that's something that we'll continue to do is,
yes,
especially with those higher need communities. You're talking about working with people who are in poverty. Transportation is always a large barrier. And so being able to decentralize services is best for the clients that you're serving.
Perfect. That localized idea is huge, and you all do that so well. But thinking, I'm in Tallahassee, not a huge city, but we have plenty of distinct areas, you know, and I know we were just talking about this before, but 20 minutes is a long way for somebody to drive in Tallahassee. But if there is a way to provide in their own neighborhood, whether it's, you know, outreach or, you know, what have you, that can be something that's really helpful for people to be able to see.
Yeah, and can I piggyback off something
yeah.
Nicole was talking about? Definitely the relationships and this very human element of volunteering. Like, yes, people do connect to your mission, but I think as much as I would love for them all to be deeply connected to our mission, there's a bigger piece there of relationship and the friends and the people that they know that I think is probably the bigger driver of volunteer engagement that we see. And so something that we did in the relationship, and I love your drive-through idea, I like to steal that sometime, that it replies again, is just taking the time to call and talk with them one-on-one. I know that seems like an, you know, a daunting task if you're spending 10, 15 minutes talking to everyone and you're one person trying to manage it all. Something that we did was leverage a lot of our volunteer leaders whose roles really weren't happening at that time, just to call the other leaders and go through that list. So I was, you know, using 20 volunteer leaders to call other volunteer leaders. So they're calling hundreds of people, but, you know, I think you can lean on volunteers to do a lot of those volunteer management tasks. And it's so important for that connection and that relationship.
And that's that offering different options like Barbara was talking about. So maybe, you know, you have a volunteer leader, COVID or not, who just can't commit to that time anymore. But you can say, I would love for you to call and check in with some of our volunteers, you know, having those several other options available for them if possible, so that if something changes about their schedule or, you know, they have, you know, when I had a kid, things shifted forever a lot, but it doesn't mean I don't still want to be engaged. So I can have that virtual board meeting. I can volunteer in different ways, and the organizations I've been most connected to have been quick to give me other options. That's been, you know, really significant. So, you know, I know you all are aware of that, and I think that's a huge best practice no matter when, you know. So Barbara, when you were kind of going into that later kind of stage, what did that look like?
Yeah, so for Centro Campesino, our later was literally May 2020. We received notice that we needed to operate face-to-face in regular programming, not just the emergency assistance, yes. And that was a hit for us. What I earlier said that I would share later is that a lot of us experienced death, severe critical conditions due to COVID. And it was traumatizing, literally. And something to notate is that we are serving while we're going through trauma in and of itself. So that was very different for our volunteers and our staff to adjust to, right? So we were problem solving, we were grieving all together, which was a different experience. But nonetheless, we had to buckle down and get things done. And May 2020, we received notice and we realized that in June, we had to have doors open, meaning everything had to be structured. What was a circular desk for children now had to be individual desks. Like what was 25 students in one classroom will now turn into 8 students in one classroom. You can't have members and staff. Members are AmeriCorps members, by the way, which serve as volunteers. And the additional volunteers that usually serve during the summertime, we had to put that limit, unfortunately, in the capacity of how many individuals and bodies could be in a classroom at one given time. So we did have to prioritize and be strategic about who will be in that room. And while unfortunately we did not have to set the boundaries, and volunteers that didn't have a tie through the AmeriCorps programs, unfortunately, weren't able to serve in that capacity. And we were able to provide service opportunities to our members on site. So it was very strategic the way that we offered that. But there were other opportunities, such as our food distributions, our emergency financial assistance, our testing events, our vaccine events, and our door-to-door community outreach and education. So that's something that was a completely new concept to Centro Campesino, which is going door-to-door, providing PPE information and resource access for COVID-19 testing and information in our community. And that was the biggest opportunity for volunteers, which is what we needed to leverage. But there was a lot of community resistance to volunteering in that capacity, which was completely understandable, as we as a team were concerned about the safety risks as well. We educated ourselves, of course, and we educated our team on safety, social distancing, on safety gear, mask wearing, at the time, the plastic cover. So it's a matter of education and understanding and exposing ourselves to things that we are not uncomfortable with, right? When I heard COVID-19 pandemic and then my department would lead that, I was like, no, I know what it does to families. My uncle passed away in April of 2020. I was his proxy. I know what that does, and I don't want to deal. And I was an opportunity where I had to grieve myself, but I also had to put my head down and say, selflessness, right? You know what it could do. So if you can help prevent that from happening to someone else, then this is your opportunity to make that happen with your team. And it was, and it's been such a life-changing experience to the entire Centro Campesino team. We have volunteers who are now engaging in all these activities and going door to door and doing our canvassing and doing the emergency distributions and operating in vaccine sites, not, of course, with safety guidelines, right? They're not going to administer a vaccine. We're not either. We're not medical experts, but we're assisting the community. Something about Centro Campesinos that we serve a lot of individuals who are undocumented, immigrants, low to moderate income areas. So there's a lot of challenges as far as technology is concerned, language barriers, literacy. So our team, volunteers and staff, are all equipped to be able to serve them. So we have gotten creative as far as the access to technology so that they're able to register on a smartphone to be able to get a test or a vaccine when they only have a flip phone and they barely know how to use the flip phone. So what I can say is, because we were highly encouraged, pushed to open up doors in June of 2020, this year has been a year for bonding, for opportunity within the pandemic to be able to bring back, like Nicole said, that sense of belonging, particularly for our volunteers. And some of the same concepts that Nathan and Nicole had mentioned about parades, like for us, there's signature events during the year that bring that camaraderie with our volunteers, a sense of belonging, encouraging, and getting to know each other, because when you're serving on a task, it's very difficult to get to know each other. And that's just such a transparent truth, and we're cognizant of it. We have the monthly meetings, the monthly engagement opportunities, but the holidays are big for us. The holidays, we do a gift exchange and everybody comes together and we eat together and we have fun, we play games. Of course, that wasn't gonna happen. So we did a drive up. So the staff served as caterers, and we, of course, with our safety gear, brought the food to them in their cars, like a drive up movie. It was a drive up holiday celebration. And what we did is, it took a little longer, but that's okay. They took turns to come up to the table to get their gift that had already been sitting there for a little bit. So that's, you know, safety and germs and whatnot. And the staff, which are limited, you know, it was 7 of us, were the ones that were outside. So we were still abiding with the crowd restriction, right? Because at that time we were still under restrictions, even outside. So everybody got the opportunity to do what we usually do, just a different setting. Our onboarding, which is usually really big for our cohorts, particularly for AmeriCorps program. It's the time where we actually get to know our members, get to know our volunteers, so that we are able to have a successful year and we can come together as a group, sure, on Zoom or Teams, but it's the interpersonal relationships that we weren't able to do. So we decided we did it. That one we did a parade, and we had like black curtains and balloons and stations with those little, I don't know, it's like pop-up cakes, pop cakes, and like different stations with their binders for their orientation, with little knickknacks that they were going to use with their gear. So different types of stations, and they each took turns to like take pictures, and we have little props for them. So we put music, we were dancing, of course, social distancing. They loved and made fun of us because we were dancing, and I'm like, yes, Love it. We love it. So we've been able to reminisce on those times when times get tough, and we'll play it for them in our member meetings. We're like, look, you know, so it's a matter of being able to engage. So having prepped so early in advance gave us time to develop our relationships with our volunteers. And that's somewhat like what Nicole was mentioning, that during this time, she had the opportunity to do that with her teams as well. So the blessings in disguise, how we like to call
Right.
them over here at Centrum.
Well, thank you all. I mean, I think, and if this is beneficial to anybody on the call, I'm happy to write up some of the key notes from this time together, as well as some of the resources, because I think that, you know, again, all of these things that that you all are talking about are translatable to the now. The connection component, connection to the mission, but above all to one another, is so huge. Texting to check in, you know, even if it's not a call, not even needing anything, that genuine, how are you, will bring people out to do jobs they're not comfortable with, they don't enjoy a whole lot, but they know that this is a community that they're a part of, and they want to see it flourish, you know. So what I want to do real quickly is I want to show you all, let me get my screen up. So again, this is from the from Points of Light. Now, again, this was May 2020, but I do think that these are the kinds of things that we continually see when it comes to motivations and barriers for volunteering. And I'm also really excited to say that Volunteer Florida is going to be commissioning a survey on volunteerism that will be statewide. And we're going to cover some of these same questions and hoping to get county level data. Stand by on that. But I'm really hoping to be able to provide you all with some real detailed information about what volunteerism, what Floridians think about volunteerism, the impact, some of the demographics of it. And we think that'll be beneficial to the field as well as all of the sectors when we really look at something that's so foundational to the success of our communities in any different, you know, all of our focus areas: environment, arts and culture, human services, legal services, all of it. So I just wanted to point this out at the time, and I know that much of this is still the same. If you look here at what some of the personal motivations are to volunteer, you know, I think it's really interesting that second one sets an example for the young, for example. So how you're engaging families is something to think about. You know, part of that example is actually having those young people come along with you when you do things. So I know some of you, it's not, you know, realistic depending on what your volunteer program is. Just the happiness, paying it forward, the specific issues, you know, improving the community, and you all know what these are. And if you don't from your volunteers, this is something that is worth kind of trying to tease out from them why they're there. Because that helps inform how you keep them, how you retain them, how you relate to them. So just wanted to show you all this. If you have any thoughts about it, or if you know, I think with all of you, connection was such a big part of it. And let's see if that's really on there. I mean, there's connect with like-minded people, but you know, that brings me joy and enriches my life. I mean, I think the connection is a huge part of that. So, you know, in your organizations, what that really looks like, I think is important to consider. And then one of the other things that is in the report is something that Nathan talked about quite specifically, which is local opportunities. I think this is really interesting. But you see that people really wanted to interact directly. They wanted to impact their own community, wanted to volunteer through an organization, participate in person, which we are able to do now for the most part, help groups of people do it on a regular basis. These are just really interesting compared to some of what's over on that left side. It doesn't mean we don't need these one-time activities or being able to have those virtual opportunities. Those should still be there. And again, we're hoping to get some Florida data on this. But I think that this is interesting, and I think probably most of you have organizations that have those local opportunities, but helping people connect to why it's so important and how it's benefiting their communities or their environment, animals, whatever it is, what those bigger picture returns on investment are for the work that they do with your organizations. And then I think this one is interesting too, just for you all to see, but top barriers to volunteering. And again, this is a nationwide survey, and this was in the, on the ramping up of the pandemic. But I thought this was really interesting. Unsure how to get involved. And I hear that a lot. I get regular emails and calls from people who have no clue how to connect. They're aware of maybe Big Brothers Big Sisters and the United Way. and that's it. The idea of, volunteering in one of our fantastic Florida state parks or with an art program or, beyond tutoring and mentoring, although that is so critical, a lot of people are not familiar with that. And so we try with Volunteer Connect, of course, to do this ongoing promotion to the public about being a source to find out. But, if you walk into a performance, a lot of people don't know that usher is a volunteer and that they could do that. Oh man, if I could just chat with people and hand them a program and hug people, I would be right there. I don't know if you all can tell from my personality that maybe that would be something I would want to do. But I wouldn't know that wasn't a staff member doing that. So can't find opportunities near me, not sure how to get involved, not sure what I can do to be helpful. I mean, that's wild, but that's what a lot of people said here. So how do we position ourselves to help with that sense of value that anyone can bring, not just someone who is skilled in something that we consider skilled, So thinking about that, what not just you can make a difference, but what's that difference specifically and how people can serve. I give example a lot of clerical work. So how many of you, if things were filed in the incorrect place, how problematic would that be for you, right? So organizing somebody who wants to do database management, enter things into Excel, I mean, how critical is that kind of work? And if somebody wants to do that and thinks, oh man, all I have to offer is doing some sort of administrative work, that is huge. That helps our organizations run efficiently and effectively. And that's something you can put in a post in your recruitment efforts. It's not just wanted someone to do XYZ. So again, thinking about what it means to be helpful and making sure that people have a really good understanding of that. Now, there are a number of other things on here as well, but those were the ones that were kind of the top 2 to 3 there. Okay, so I know we are hitting that gorgeous 11 o'clock space. I am ready for my mid to late morning snack, and then 45 minutes from now, I will have lunch. For those of you who are Lord of the Rings fan, there's first breakfast, second breakfast, first supper, second supper. Anyway, so I don't want to keep you all too long. I really appreciate all of you being a part of this. It will be recorded. I'll send you all links to the Points of Light report. I think it's some interesting information. Some of you I know well, and I'm so appreciative of the relationships that we have with your organizations. But please let me know if there's any way that you think Volunteer Florida can serve you or help you or support you in the work that you do. If we're not able to, I may know somebody or an organization that can. So I'd love to be able to connect people, establish those linkages. We'll have a couple of more sessions over the summer. We're going to look at a volunteer perspective in July. So we're going to have some volunteers who are going to kind of share their own perspectives on motivations, barriers, COVID, and so on. I'll be doing one training on virtual volunteerism in August. And then in October, we're going to have a series. So every week, we're going to have a nationally recognized speaker who's going to come in and talk about a particular volunteer engagement subject. So we had our large convening last fall, and all those recordings are available on our website, but this will be a little smaller. That one's going to probably be biannually. So I hope you sign up for the newsletter. Please email me if you need anything. A special thank you to Barbara, Nathan, and Nicole. I'm going to give you all a round of applause for your perspective and for sharing with us. So thank you all for joining us this morning, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Y'all take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Be
Thank you
safe
all.
and healthy.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.